It was an ordinary evening, the kind where everything feels predictable. She had finished her day at work and felt the familiar tug of fatigue that came with hours of staring at a computer screen. Her shoulders were sore, her mind cluttered with small worries, emails left unanswered, deadlines looming, and 1,000 little things demanding attention. She needed something different, something to break the monotony. So, she decided to go to a local piano recital. She didn't know why she picked that particular event. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small recital in a community hall. She told herself it would be relaxing, maybe even a little inspiring. She imagined soft music in the background while people politely clapped and chatted. Nothing extraordinary, just a quiet evening to escape the ordinary. The hall was modest. It wasn't a grand concert theater with velvet curtains and crystal chandeliers. Instead, it was simple, with rows of chairs lined up neatly on a polished wooden floor. The stage was small but elegant, holding a single grand piano that gleamed under the warm lights. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and old carpet, comforting in its own way. A few people were already seated, whispering to one another softly, while others adjusted programs in their hands. The room had a calm, almost intimate feeling. Like stepping into a space where the outside world didn't exist for a while. She found a seat near the middle. From there, she could see the piano clearly, and she liked to watch the hands of pianists when they played. She glanced around at the audience, recognizing a few familiar faces from the neighborhood. Most were older than her, dressed in casual clothes and talking in quiet tones. A sense of normalcy washed over her. She thought she knew exactly what to expect. A few pieces played well enough, polite applause, and then the evening would end. It would be pleasant, but nothing memorable. She even pulled out her phone for a moment, scrolling absent-mindedly as if she were trying to occupy herself until the performance started. Then, the lights dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the room. The performer walked onto the stage. She noticed him immediately. He wasn't flashy, dressed in simple clothes that could easily go unnoticed. But there was something about the way he carried himself. He had a calm, quiet presence, the kind that made people instinctively pay attention without him saying a word. He adjusted the bench, took a deep breath, and sat at the piano. For a moment he seemed ordinary, almost unremarkable, and she almost looked back at her phone. But something told her to put it away and just watch. His hands hovered above the keys for a second before he began to play. The first notes were soft, delicate, almost like a whisper. They weren't loud or demanding. They didn't ask for attention. And yet, somehow, they pulled her in. She felt herself leaning forward slightly, as if drawn closer by the sound. The music wasn't just notes on a page, it felt alive. It had warmth, depth, and emotion. She noticed others in the audience growing quiet, too. The usual low hum of chatter disappearing as everyone turned their attention to the piano. At first, the melody was simple, almost tentative, but it carried a strange beauty. Each note seemed carefully chosen, not just played but felt. There was a rhythm to it that made her chest tighten slightly, a kind of familiar ache that she couldn't quite place. She realized she had stopped thinking about her day, the emails, the meetings, and the endless to-do lists. All of that disappeared. In its place was the music, filling the room and somehow reaching into her own heart. She looked at the pianist more closely now. His eyes were focused, but not on the sheet music. They were closed, as if he were seeing the music in his mind before it even touched the keys. His fingers moved with grace, sometimes soft and flowing, sometimes sharp and precise, never rushed, never forced. She noticed a slight tremble when he hit a particularly high note. And it made the music feel human, real, imperfect in the most beautiful way. It wasn't about showing off skill. It was about expression, telling a story without words. As the piece continued, she realized that her initial assumption that this would be just a typical performance was completely wrong. This was something more. There was an honesty in the way he played, a vulnerability that she couldn't ignore. It reminded her of moments in her own life when she had felt exposed, when she had dared to try something even though she wasn't sure she could succeed. There was a connection she couldn't explain, a resonance between the notes he played and the emotions she had tucked away. Inside herself, she looked around at the audience again. Some people had tears quietly running down their cheeks. Others sat completely still, mesmerized, their hands gripping their laps tightly. She realized that the music wasn't just touching her, it was touching everyone. And it wasn't just the sound. It was the presence of the pianist, the care he put into each note, the honesty in his performance. For a moment, the world outside the hall ceased to exist. There was only the music, the piano, and the man who seemed to be speaking directly to each person in the room. Time felt strange. It slowed down, stretching each note, each pause, each breath. She couldn't remember exactly how long she had been sitting there, only that she was completely absorbed. The music was doing something to her, something she hadn't expected, something she hadn't even known she needed. Her heart felt lighter, yet somehow heavier at the same time. It was as if the piano was unlocking emotions she didn't realize she had been holding inside. She felt joy, sadness, hope, and longing all at once. She thought about her life outside the recital hall, how rushed, chaotic, and predictable it had been. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly present. Not worrying about tomorrow, not dwelling on yesterday, but fully here in this moment. She had come expecting something simple, a few pleasant tunes to fill the evening. Instead, she was experiencing something profound, something she would remember long after she left the hall. When the first piece ended, there was a soft pause. She realized that no one had clapped immediately. The room was holding its breath, savoring the silence that followed, like an echo of the music lingering in the air. Then, slowly, applause began, quiet at first, then growing stronger. She joined in, clapping with a sense of gratitude she couldn't fully explain. She felt lucky just to be there, to witness the beginning of something she sensed would be extraordinary. As the pianist prepared for the next piece, she felt a mix of anticipation and curiosity. There was something about him she didn't understand yet. It wasn't just his skill, it was the way he seemed to pour himself into the music, the honesty that made each note feel personal. She couldn't take her eyes off him, wondering what experiences, what struggles, what joys had shaped the person sitting at the piano. She had come thinking it would be just another evening, just another performance. And now she realized she had stumbled into something far beyond her expectations. For the first time, she put her phone completely away. She didn't need it. Nothing else mattered but the music and the moment. She wanted to remember every detail, the soft lighting, the polished wood of the piano, the slight movement of his shoulders as he played, the expressions on the faces around her. She wanted to feel this fully, to let it sink into her bones. What she thought would be ordinary had already begun to change her in ways she couldn't yet name, and in that quiet, golden-lit hall she felt a small spark of excitement. A sense that something important was about to happen. Something beyond expectation, beyond prediction, something that could touch her life in ways she hadn't imagined. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The second piece began almost immediately after the first, but it was entirely different. Where the first had been soft and gentle, this one carried a quiet intensity that made her sit up straighter in her seat. The first notes were slow, deliberate, almost like footsteps echoing through an empty corridor. They demanded attention, but not in a loud or aggressive way. Instead, they seemed to pull at something deep inside her, stirring feelings she didn't know she had. She realized, almost with surprise, that she was holding her breath, listening not just with her ears, but with her entire being. The pianist's fingers moved across the keys with a confidence that was impossible to ignore. Each movement seemed perfectly calculated, yet completely natural, as if the music was already inside him, waiting to pour out. She noticed the way his hands stretched and flexed, how his fingers danced lightly at times and pressed firmly at others. It was mesmerizing. She couldn't look away. The room itself seemed to shrink, the walls and ceiling fading into the background, leaving only him, the piano, and the sound that now filled every corner. There was a story in the music. She wasn't sure what it was exactly, but she could feel it. Moments of sorrow that seemed personal, joys that lifted her spirit, and a sense of longing that tugged at her chest. It was as if he had lived 1,000 lives, and every experience had left its mark in the way he played. She thought about her own life, the routine, the small disappointments, the fleeting moments of happiness, and realized she had never felt anything quite like this before. Music, she suddenly understood, could carry the weight of a person's entire journey. She glanced around at the audience, curious to see if anyone else was noticing the depth of the performance. Some people had tears quietly rolling down their cheeks. Others sat completely still, staring at the pianist with expressions she couldn't read. No one was whispering. No one was shifting in their seats. The room was completely silent, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if everyone had agreed, without speaking, to honor what was happening on stage. For the first time in a long while, she felt connected to a group of strangers, united by a single extraordinary experience. Her mind, which had been so cluttered just moments before, was now clear. She wasn't thinking about work, responsibilities, or any of the worries she carried daily. She was simply listening, feeling the music resonate inside her. Each note seemed to reach a part of her that she had forgotten existed, a quiet corner of her heart that rarely stirred. And yet, now it was alive, awakening to the melody that was both gentle and powerful, sad and beautiful, simple and infinitely complex all at once. She began to notice the pianist in a way she hadn't before. His eyes were still closed, but there was a subtle tension in his brow, a small movement of his shoulders that revealed how much he was giving to the music. Every so often his lips would part slightly as if he were holding back a sigh or a word he couldn't speak aloud. His presence was quiet but commanding in a way that made it impossible not to watch him. It was no longer just about the music. It was about him, the person behind the music, and the life he must have lived to create something so moving. She wondered about his story. Who was he beyond this hall? What had shaped him to be able to produce such beauty? She imagined moments of struggle, of loneliness, of joy and heartbreak, all flowing through his fingers and into the piano. The thought made her feel a strange mixture of admiration and curiosity. She wanted to know everything about him, to understand what had brought him here and what he had given up along the way. It was a feeling she hadn't expected to have at a simple recital in a small community hall. The music grew louder, but not harshly so. It built slowly, layer upon layer, until it filled every space in the room. She could feel it in her chest, like vibrations that went beyond sound, reaching into her very bones. It was exhilarating and almost painful at the same time. She realized she was smiling without noticing it, moved by the sheer intensity of the performance. The pianist's hands moved faster now, but the control never wavered. Every note, every chord, every pause was deliberate, precise, and full of meaning. She noticed small details that made the performance even more human. The way his knuckles flexed when he hit a chord, the slight hesitation before a difficult passage, the way he adjusted his posture slightly with each change in rhythm. These little imperfections, far from diminishing the performance, made it more real, more relatable. It reminded her that true beauty often came from the combination of skill and vulnerability. She realized she had never truly listened to music in this way before, and the revelation left her both awed and inspired. As the piece progressed, she felt a growing sense of anticipation. She didn't know what would come next, but she wanted to experience every second of it. Each note seemed to tell part of a story, but she was certain there was more to come. She felt herself leaning forward in her seat, almost instinctively, as if trying to catch every nuance, every subtle change in tempo or emotion. She could feel the energy in the room shift with each phrase, a quiet electricity that connected everyone in the audience. For the first time, she realized that music could do something words never could. It could communicate directly to the soul, bypassing logic, reason, and expectation. She felt emotions she hadn't fully acknowledged: hope, longing, gratitude, even a quiet sadness that she didn't understand. And yet, all of these feelings were beautiful in their own way, part of a tapestry woven by the pianist's hands and heart. She understood in a profound way that this performance was not just entertainment, it was a gift, something rare and precious. The audience remained still as the piece moved into its final section. The tempo slowed slightly, the notes becoming more deliberate, almost like whispers. She felt her own breathing slow, mirroring the rhythm of the music. The last few chords lingered in the air, delicate and haunting. She felt a lump in her throat as she realized the performance was coming to an end. She didn't want it to stop. She wanted to sit in this moment forever, to let the music wash over her, to understand everything it was trying to say. When the last note faded, there was a pause, a collective holding of breath. Then, slowly, applause began, soft at first, then growing steadily. She clapped, but not out of obligation. She clapped because she felt gratitude, wonder, and awe all at once. The music had touched her in ways she couldn't fully explain. She looked around at the other audience members, noticing their expressions, their quiet smiles, the occasional tear. She realized that everyone had experienced something deeply personal in their own way. Even though they were all in the same room, as he prepared for the next piece, she felt a strange sense of curiosity and excitement. She wanted to know more about him, to understand the person behind the music. She found herself wondering how many hours he had spent practicing, what obstacles he had faced, and what drove him to play with such intensity and honesty. The thought made her feel a connection to him, even though she had never spoken to him, never even seen him before tonight. There was a humanity in his performance that transcended words, and it touched something inside her that she hadn't felt in years. She realized she had been wrong when she thought this would be just a piano performance. It was so much more. It was an experience that stirred the heart, awakened the spirit, and reminded her of the beauty that could be found in the simplest moments. She felt alive in a way she hadn't for a long time, as if the music had opened a door inside her that she didn't even know existed. And she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of something remarkable. The lights were soft, the room warm, and the pianist sat poised, ready for the next piece. She could feel a sense of anticipation building inside her, a quiet excitement for what was to come. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on the piano, ready to be carried once again into a world where music spoke louder than words, and where every note held a story waiting to be discovered. In that moment, she understood that she wasn't just listening to music, she was witnessing something extraordinary, something that had the power to change the way she saw the world. She didn't know yet how or why, but she felt a quiet certainty that her life had been touched in a way she would never forget. The next piece began softly, almost hesitantly, but there was a weight to it that immediately drew her in. This wasn't the gentle, flowing music of the first piece, nor the quiet intensity of the second. This one had a depth that felt personal, almost intimate, as if the pianist were sharing a part of himself with every person in the room. She leaned forward instinctively, feeling as though the notes were meant just for her. Even though hundreds of eyes were fixed on the stage, as the first chords echoed through the hall, she noticed the subtle changes in his posture. His body swayed slightly with the rhythm, shoulders rising and falling as though the music were breathing through him. His fingers moved with precision and confidence, yet there was a vulnerability in the way he touched the keys, as if each note were a fragment of a story he had carried silently for years. She could almost see the life behind the music, the experiences, the struggles, and the quiet victories that had shaped him into the musician before her. The melody was haunting. It wasn't loud or overpowering, but it carried a resonance that made the air feel thicker, heavier in the most beautiful way. She felt it deep in her chest, like an invisible hand gently pressing on her heart, stirring emotions she had never given voice to. There was a longing, a quiet ache in the music that made her remember moments in her own life that she had tried to forget. The pianist's fingers didn't just hit the keys, they caressed them, spoke through them, told stories that words could never capture. She noticed the subtle expressions on his face. His brow furrowed slightly during complex passages, his lips pressed together as if holding back a sigh. Occasionally, his eyes opened for just a brief moment, scanning the room, connecting with the audience without saying a word. And when their gaze met, even if only for a fraction of a second, she felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't just music anymore. It was communication, a silent understanding that bridged the space between performer and listener. She realized that she was not alone in feeling this way. The entire hall seemed suspended in time, each person caught in the spell of the performance. All hearts beating in quiet unison, the piece grew slowly, building layer upon layer until the music filled every corner of the room. It had a rhythm that mimicked the ebb and flow of life itself, moments of tension followed by release, passages of quiet reflection interrupted by surges of energy. She felt as though she were walking through a landscape of emotion, guided only by the pianist's hands. She imagined the experiences that might have led him to create such a melody, the nights of doubt, the long hours of practice, the small triumphs no one ever noticed. It struck her how much of a person could be revealed without a single word being spoken. She caught herself imagining his life outside of the recital hall. Who was he when he wasn't playing? Did he wake up every morning thinking about music? Did he struggle to balance dreams with the realities of life, as everyone did? She wondered if he had felt alone at times, as she often had, and if the piano had been his companion in those moments. The thought made her feel a quiet connection to him, a sense of empathy she hadn't expected. Here was a stranger, yet through the language of music, he had made her feel seen, understood, and alive. The audience remained completely still. No one whispered, no one shifted in their seats. It was as if the room itself had become part of the music, holding its breath, waiting to see where the melody would go. She noticed the older couple in the front row, their hands lightly clasped, eyes closed, swaying gently with the rhythm. A young man in the back sat rigid, but his expression betrayed awe and admiration. She realized that each person in the room was experiencing something unique, something deeply personal, yet all of them were connected through the same music. It was extraordinary, and she felt privileged just to witness it. The pianist's hands moved faster now, navigating complex passages that required both skill and emotion. She could see the subtle tension in his fingers, the way his wrists adjusted to maintain control, the delicate balance between precision and feeling. Every movement seemed intentional yet effortless, as if the music was a natural extension of him. She realized she had been watching his hands the entire time, fascinated not just by the music but by the human effort, the dedication, and the artistry behind it. There was beauty in the struggle, in the perfection born of practice and perseverance, and she felt deeply moved by it. There were moments when the music slowed, becoming almost fragile. The notes hung in the air like whispered confessions, and she felt a lump rise in her throat. She thought about the people she had loved, lost, or disappointed, the mistakes she had made, the dreams she had shelved. The music seemed to reach into those hidden corners of her heart, acknowledging them, comforting them, and giving them a voice. She realized that the pianist wasn't just performing. He was sharing something profoundly human, a reminder that life, with all its complexity, was beautiful and worth feeling fully. She noticed a subtle smile on his lips during a particularly tender passage, and it made her heart lift. It was a small, fleeting expression, but it revealed a hint of joy, a quiet satisfaction that came from creating something meaningful. She imagined the countless hours he had spent perfecting this piece, the moments of frustration and doubt, the times he had questioned whether anyone would ever understand or care. And yet, here he was, performing it flawlessly, with emotion so raw and real that it left her breathless. She understood then that true art was not about showing off skill, it was about conveying truth, about making others feel something that they couldn't find anywhere else. The music began to build toward its climax. The room felt electric, as if every heart were beating in anticipation of what would come next. She felt a rush of adrenaline, a thrill that made her palms sweat slightly. It was as if she were standing on the edge of something profound, watching life itself unfold through the piano. The notes grew louder, faster, more urgent, yet every sound was still controlled, precise, deliberate. It was breathtaking, and she felt herself completely immersed, forgetting everything else in the world. And then, just as suddenly as it had escalated, the music softened again. The final notes were gentle, delicate, almost like a sigh. They lingered in the air, leaving a quiet echo that seemed to resonate within her own body. She realized she had been holding her breath, and now it escaped slowly, carrying with it a sense of wonder, awe, and gratitude. She felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of what she had just Experience. The room remained silent for a heartbeat longer than necessary. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if everyone present understood that this moment was special, a rare instance of true connection between human hearts, mediated by nothing but sound. Then, gradually, the audience began to clap. It started quietly, hesitantly, almost afraid to break the spell, and then swelled into genuine, heartfelt applause. She joined in immediately, clapping harder than she expected, feeling a joy and appreciation she couldn't put into words. As he prepared for the next piece, she felt a deep sense of curiosity. There was something about him she didn't understand yet. Not just his skill, but the way he seemed to pour himself completely into the music, the honesty that made every note feel like a confession. She found herself wondering about his past, the experiences that had shaped him. The moments of struggle and triumph, the times when only the piano had understood him. It made her feel connected to him in a way she hadn't expected. A quiet recognition of the shared humanity between them. She noticed small details. She hadn't before: the slight tremor in his hands during rapid passages, the way his eyes softened when playing the more tender sections, the tiny adjustments in his posture as he navigated challenging chords. Each detail added to the sense of intimacy she felt, as though she were being allowed a rare glimpse into his world. She felt grateful, not just for the music, but for the vulnerability it represented, the courage to expose oneself so completely to strangers. It was inspiring, humbling, and deeply moving all at once. By the end of the piece, she felt changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that could be explained easily, but subtly, quietly, inside. The music had awakened something in her, a sense of awareness, of presence, of appreciation for the beauty and complexity of life. She realized that she had come to the recital expecting something simple, maybe even forgettable, and instead had witnessed something extraordinary. She had experienced emotion in its purest form, unfiltered and raw. Carried through the hands of a man she had never known until tonight, she took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her. Her mind was calm, her heart full, and she felt a strange anticipation for what would come next. The next piece might be just as beautiful, or it might be different, but she knew one thing. She wanted to experience every note, every pause, every subtle nuance. She had learned something about herself, about the power of music, and about the quiet, transformative beauty of witnessing someone give themselves fully to their craft. And as the pianist positioned his hands for the next composition, she felt a growing certainty that this evening was not just about listening to music, it was about discovering a story, a life, a human truth. What she had thought would be just another wreck. As the pianist's fingers moved across the keys, she suddenly noticed something familiar: a small scar on his hand. It was subtle, barely noticeable unless you were paying close attention, but it struck her instantly. She remembered seeing it years ago at a charity event in the town square. Back then, he had played the piano to raise money for a local cause, a brief performance that left an impression on her even at the time. She had never known much about him beyond that moment. She had thought of him as just a talented pianist, someone whose life was distant and separate from her own. And yet now, sitting in this hall, watching him pour his heart into the music, she realized there was more to him than she had ever imagined. The recognition unsettled her. How could the same person who had once performed casually in a small public space now create music so breathtaking, so profound? She watched closely, seeing the same quiet concentration, the same unassuming presence, yet with a depth that had clearly grown over the years. The scar on his hand wasn't just a mark, it was a symbol, a reminder that he had lived, struggled, and persevered. And now, through the piano, he was telling a story she hadn't fully understood until this moment. The music itself seemed to shift with this realization. Notes she had thought were beautiful suddenly took on new meaning. There was a depth of feeling she hadn't noticed before, a subtle vulnerability in the way he phrased each passage. It was as if he were sharing the moments of his life, the victories, the failures, the sacrifices, and the quiet triumphs through the piano. She felt a wave of awe wash over her. She hadn't expected to be moved in this way, not by someone she barely knew, Not in a small hall in the middle of an ordinary evening. She began to imagine the story behind each note. Perhaps the scar on his hand had been the result of an accident, a challenge he had faced when he was younger, and yet he had continued to play, to pursue something he loved. She pictured him practicing late at night, fingers raw, determination in his eyes, refusing to let anything stand in the way of his music. Each chord, each phrase, now seemed imbued with that struggle, that perseverance. She realized that this performance was not just about music, it was a testament to his life. A reflection of every choice, every hardship, every quiet moment of courage. As she watched him, she felt a sense of intimacy she didn't expect. It was more than curiosity. It was a connection. She had seen him briefly before, years ago, but now she felt as though she was seeing him fully, truly, for the first time. There was a humanity in his playing that transcended the notes themselves. She noticed the subtle tremor in his hands during particularly emotional passages, the way his shoulders moved with the rhythm, the occasional deep breath he took before a complex chord. Each detail made her feel closer to him, as though the music were bridging the gap between their separate lives. The audience remained silent, but she could sense that others were feeling it too. Some had tears quietly rolling down their cheeks. Others sat still, as if afraid to break the spell. She wondered if anyone else had recognized the significance of his presence in the room, or if it was just her, this personal connection she felt through memory and intuition. She didn't know, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that she understood, even partially, the depth of what she was witnessing. Her mind wandered back to the charity event where she had first seen him. She remembered the small crowd, the sunlight glinting off the piano, the way he had smiled briefly after finishing a piece. At the time, it had been charming and impressive, but she hadn't realized the extent of his talent, nor the life he had built between then and now. Seeing him tonight, playing with such intensity and emotional honesty, she felt a deep admiration for the journey he must have taken. She thought about the sacrifices he had made, the obstacles he had overcome, the quiet hours of practice, the doubts he had likely faced. It made the performance even more extraordinary. There was something almost magical in the way he played. She felt transported, carried into a world where music and life were inseparable. Each note seemed to reveal a layer of his story, each pause a reflection of moments he had endured silently. And yet, despite the depth of the emotion, there was a control, a mastery that made everything feel intentional and meaningful. She realized she was witnessing not just a performance, but a narrative of resilience, courage, and human spirit. The realization hit her suddenly. She wasn't just listening to him play. She was seeing him. Truly seeing him, as someone who had lived a life full of challenges and triumphs, as someone whose music carried pieces of his soul. She felt a mixture of awe, admiration, and a quiet gratitude. She had come expecting a simple recital, a few moments of pleasant music, and instead she had been given a window into another human being's life. It was intimate, moving, and transformative. She noticed the subtle shifts in his expressions as he moved through the piece. A furrowed brow during a difficult section, a soft smile at a moment of triumph, a slight closing of his eyes as he lost himself in the music. These small, human gestures made her feel connected, as though she were witnessing the man behind the notes rather than just the performance. She realized that this was a rare and precious thing, the ability to share oneself fully with strangers, to communicate through art in a way that bypassed words and reached directly into hearts. Her emotions swelled as the music built to its climax. It wasn't just beautiful, it was a story unfolding in real time, a narrative of persistence, hope, and resilience. She imagined the challenges he had faced to reach this moment, the doubts he had battled, the times he might have felt invisible or misunderstood. And yet, here he was, transforming all of that into music that spoke to every person in the room. She felt tears threaten to fall, but she welcomed them. They were a recognition of the beauty and depth of the human experience, reflected in every note. For a long moment the hall seemed suspended in time. The music slowed, softened, and then rose again with a new intensity. She felt herself drawn into the rhythm, her heartbeat sinking with the rise and fall of the melody. She imagined the countless hours he had devoted to practice, the discipline required to master such pieces, and the passion that had driven him through it all. It wasn't just talent could be found anywhere. This was dedication, persistence, and love for his art expressed in the most honest way possible. Suddenly, she caught herself smiling. She realized that she felt proud in a way she hadn't expected. Proud not because she knew him personally, but because she recognized the strength it took for him to be here, in this moment, giving everything he had to his music. She felt inspired, as though witnessing someone fully committed to their passion had awakened something inside her, a reminder that perseverance and honesty could lead to extraordinary outcomes. The final notes of the piece lingered in the air, delicate and haunting. She felt the music wrap around her, filling every corner of her being. There was a quiet pause, a moment of stillness that allowed the emotional weight of the performance to settle over everyone in the room. Then the audience began to clap, softly at first, and then with growing warmth and admiration. She joined in immediately, clapping not just for the music, but for the man who had shared so much of himself with strangers in a small hall. As he prepared for the next piece, she felt a quiet sense of anticipation. She wanted to see more, to understand more, to witness the story that was unfolding through his fingers. There was something about the way he played, the honesty and vulnerability in every movement that made her feel connected to him. Even though they had never met beyond that brief encounter years ago, she realized that this evening had become something profoundly personal. In that moment, she understood that this wasn't just a piano performance. It was a reflection of a human life, a journey, a story of perseverance and quiet triumph. She felt gratitude for the chance to witness it. Awe at the depth of emotion conveyed without words, and a quiet hope that she, too, could find ways to pour herself into her own passions with the same dedication and honesty. She leaned back slightly in her seat, taking a deep breath, letting the experience settle within her. She knew that even after the recital ended, the memory of this performance would stay with her, a reminder of the extraordinary power of human expression. And as she watched him lift his hands from the keys, ready to begin the next piece, she felt certain that this evening was more than music. It was a lesson in life, resilience, and the beauty of truly seeing someone for who they are. The final piece began quietly, almost like a secret being shared. She felt a flutter of anticipation in her chest. After everything she had experienced so far, the delicate melodies, the intimate stories behind each note, the quiet revelations about the pianist, she knew that this piece would be different. There was a sense of finality in the air, as if this last performance was meant to seal the evening and leave a lasting mark on every listener. She leaned forward, eyes fixed on the pianist, ready to absorb every detail, every emotion. The first notes were soft, tentative, almost fragile. She felt them like a gentle touch on her heart, a delicate invitation into the story he was about to tell. But even in their quietness, the notes carried a weight, a depth that made her pulse quicken. There was an honesty in the music that could not be ignored. It wasn't flashy or showy, it was real. It was a life lived, a journey endured, and every hardship, every triumph, every small victory was expressed in the way his fingers danced across the keys. She felt a lump in her throat, caught off guard by the sheer emotional intensity. As the piece progressed, it began to build. Each note seemed to grow in confidence, weaving a tapestry of sound that was both beautiful and profound. She noticed the subtle shifts in his expressions, the furrowed brow during complex sections, the gentle smile as the melody softened, the occasional deep breath he took before a particularly challenging chord. Every movement was full of intention, full of life. She realized she had been holding her breath, and now she exhaled slowly, letting the music wash over her completely. It was as if the piano itself were speaking, telling a story that words could never capture. She imagined the experiences that had shaped him, the nights of doubt, the long hours of practice, the quiet moments of reflection and perseverance. Each note seemed to carry the weight of his journey, the struggles he had faced, and the resilience that had brought him to this moment. She felt honored to witness it, humbled by the courage it must take to share so much of oneself with strangers. The room was completely silent, except for the music. There was a shared reverence among the audience, a recognition that they were experiencing something rare and precious. Some people had tears in their eyes, others were completely still, absorbing every nuance. She felt connected to everyone there, united by the same extraordinary experience. And yet she also felt a deep, personal connection to the pianist himself, as though she could see his life story unfold in real time. Note by note, the melody began to rise, growing in intensity and emotion. Her heart beat faster, mirroring the rhythm of the music. It was exhilarating and overwhelming all at once. She could feel the energy in the room, the collective anticipation, the silent understanding that this was not just a performance, it was a gift. She thought about the ordinary evening she had expected, the quiet recital she had assumed would be just background music, and marveled at how completely wrong she had been. This was not ordinary. This was transformative. As the music swelled, she noticed small, intimate details, the way his fingers flexed at the right moments, the subtle movements of his wrists, the way he leaned slightly into the piano as if sharing a secret. These were not just technical gestures. They were expressions of life, reflections of experience, and manifestations of emotion. She realized she was not merely watching a performance. She was witnessing a human soul poured into sound. A heart exposed and shared with the world. Her mind drifted briefly to the life she had been living, routine, predictable, often consumed by trivial worries. She thought about the moments she had taken for granted, the days that had felt ordinary or mundane. And now, in this hall, through this music, she understood something essential. Life was not measured by routine alone. It was measured by moments of truth, by connection, by vulnerability, and by the courage to express oneself fully, even when no one might notice. The pianist had reminded her of something she had almost forgotten: the beauty of living openly, of giving oneself completely to passion and purpose. Tears threatened to spill as she watched him play. They weren't tears of sadness, but of awe, of gratitude, of deep recognition. She felt emotions she had tucked away for years, memories she hadn't visited in a long time, and even hopes she hadn't allowed herself to dream. The music seemed to hold all of it, the longing, the joy, the pain, the hope, and deliver it directly into her heart. She realized that this was the power of art, to reach beyond words, to communicate directly to the soul, to make strangers feel seen and understood. As the piece moved toward its climax, the tempo quickened slightly, the melody growing richer, more layered. She felt a wave of exhilaration sweep over her. Every note was deliberate yet effortless, each phrase perfectly balanced between technical mastery and raw emotion. The pianist's hands moved with precision, yet they seemed to carry the weight of countless experiences, the small sacrifices, the late nights, the quiet determination. She imagined the countless hours he had devoted to this craft, the dedication that had brought him to this very stage, and she felt inspired. The music reached a crescendo. Her chest tightened, her eyes widened, as she felt an overwhelming sense of connection not only to the pianist, but to herself, to the people around her, to life itself. It was as if the music had unlocked something within her, a realization that beauty, courage, and resilience were intertwined. She felt gratitude for being present, for being able to witness this extraordinary act of vulnerability and strength. The room seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the moment, every person caught in the spell of the final piece. And then, just as suddenly as it had grown, the music softened. The final notes were delicate, almost like a sigh, lingering in the air long after the keys had been released. The room held its breath, savoring the silence, allowing the emotional weight to settle over everyone present. She felt a profound stillness inside herself, a sense of completion, as if she had witnessed the end of a story, the closing of a chapter that was both personal and universal. The applause began softly, hesitant at first, and then grew into a wave of genuine, heartfelt appreciation. She clapped, not just for the music, but for the man who had shared so much of himself, who had transformed a simple evening into an unforgettable experience. She looked around at the audience, noticing the smiles, the tears, the quiet nods of admiration. Each person had been touched in their own way but she knew that this night would remain with them long after they left the hall. As the pianist stood and bowed, she felt a mixture of awe and gratitude. He had given them something rare, a glimpse into the soul, a story told without words, a reminder of the extraordinary power of human expression. She felt changed, subtly but profoundly. The evening had shifted something inside her, opening her heart to emotion, connection, and possibility. She realized she would carry this moment with her, remembering the beauty of witnessing someone give themselves fully to their art, to their passion, and to the world. She left the hall slowly, not wanting to rush back into the ordinary, the familiar, the routine. The night air felt cooler, fresher, somehow different from before. She thought about the music, the details of the performance, the emotion behind every note, and she knew that this experience had touched her life in a way that would stay with her forever. The pianist had not only played the piano, he had shared a story, revealed a life, and reminded everyone present of the beauty and depth that exists in moments of honesty, courage, and dedication. Walking home, she replayed the evening in her mind. She thought about the first piece, the second, the crescendo, the delicate finale. She remembered the scar on his hand, the subtle expressions on his face, the vulnerability in every note. She felt inspired, not just by the music, but by the person who had created it, by the life behind the sound, by the courage to share something so deeply personal. She understood now that extraordinary moments often come in ordinary settings, that beauty and inspiration can be found in unexpected places, and that a single performance can leave a lasting imprint on the heart. As she reached her door, she paused and took a deep breath. She felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the music, for the pianist, for the chance to witness something rare and extraordinary. And she felt a renewed sense of possibility in her own life. She knew that, like the pianist, she could face challenges, embrace vulnerability, and pursue what mattered with courage and dedication. The evening had been more than a recital. It had been a lesson in resilience, empathy, and the transformative power of art. She closed the door behind her, carrying the memory with her, knowing that the music would echo in her mind and heart for a long time. What she had thought would be just a piano performance had become a moment of profound insight, a reminder of the beauty of human expression, and a spark of inspiration that would continue to guide her. The evening had ended, but the experience, the connection, the emotion, the life revealed through music would remain with her forever.